Hello Stagecraft gang. Today we're going to take a quick look at a couple of tools we're going to be using in the shop pretty soon. The miter saw over here and its similar version over there. And then we'll also take a look at our table saw over there. Today's video is just meant to be a sort of quick introduction to these tools and not a super thorough explanation of how they are used. We'll talk about that when you're in the shop. So first off, we have our miter saw. We have two here. The miter saw is generally used for cutting boards kind of like this across the grain. So these shorter cuts. The nice thing about the miter saw is it has a fence here, so as long as our board is up against a fence, we can pull this down. It'll cut through the board and make a nice straight cut. If we need, we can adjust out here to cut a certain angle. There's a kind of a protractor along the outside here and an indicator to let us know whether we're on the right angle. And instead of cutting straight, we're cutting an angle. So if we want two pieces to fit together to make a corner or something like that, we can do that. We can also use this with the board like that or up like this, depending on where we would want the angle or what our personal preference is if we're cutting something straight. The only limitation is our board has to fit under the blade here in order to cut it. So this is this particular saw. Not only does it just chop down like this to cut, but we can loosen this thing over here and it can actually slide out and cut. So what that does is it lets us cut a wider piece than just the blade itself. So if we're going to be using this feature, we pull it all the way out, push it all the way down, and then push it back like that. We're going to go over to the other saw and take a look at that one. Gather up all of our necessary gear here. And let's head over there. Let me just check out the focus. Yeah, I think we're okay. Hopefully my head's not chopped off. So here we have our other miter saw. These are Smith's called the compound miter saw because they can cut an angle this way. And if we want, we can loosen back here and lay this thing over and cut an angle this way. We can do them both at the same time if we want to. So this saw works the same as the other one. You just chop it down. This one doesn't have the arm to slide on, so we're just limited to the size of the blade. To use it real simply, you just measure out whatever your distance is going to be. Mark it up. This is all stuff we've already talked about in class. Put an X on the side you're not going to keep. Put your dimension on the side that you are going to keep. Check this out. Make sure you are lined up on your line with the blade on the correct side of your mark. And then it's ready to cut. Before we would cut, we would want to put on our glasses and our ear covers as well. Those are cool. We might want to put our gloves on just so we don't get any splinters. We could have had those on already if we were handling the wood. And then to cut, you just reach up here on the handle. There's a trigger that makes it go. We're going to start it all the way. We want to always make sure that the blade's not touching the wood when we start it. We'll start it up, push it all the way down, and then release the trigger and let it come up. So we'll make one cut here, just take a look at it, double checking our spot. Now we have a nice straight cut right where we marked it. So the miter saw is good for straight cross cuts, which means we're going across the grain rather than with the grain. And if we want that angle as well, this lets us put things together so that they come in whatever angle it is. You could also cut this way. And that would let us do the same like that. So it's a very versatile tool. We use it all the time. You'll get a lot of opportunity to use it. And the other saw we're going to look at next is the table saw. So let's head over that way. The table saw also cuts straight cuts. We tend to use this for ripping, we might say, more than cross-cutting. So normally we might use a piece of plywood on here that we wanted to cut to a certain width, or maybe a wider board that we were going to cut this way. Whenever we're using any saw, normally what we want is for the longest part of the board to be against the fence. So we wouldn't normally cut with our table saw this way because it's very easy for this to get sideways, and if it gets sideways, it's when the blade tries to kick it back at you, which is not good. So normally we are using this more in a downward motion. Let's adjust that a little bit. So normally we'd be cutting something through like this. We can adjust several things on here. One is how high the blade is up, so we can make sure we're cutting all the way through what we're going to cut. Depending on what we're cutting, we want different heights. You can just adjust this with a little, this guy on the front here. There's a lock here once we have it the height we want. This is how we power it up. First we turn it on. It's going to go through a cycle to make sure that it's ready. And then if we wanted to have this blade, instead of straight, be on an angle, we could use this out here, but that's not something we use very often. So let this guy get started. Once it just has a green light, it's ready to go. There's a paddle right here. We pull it out to make it start. Push it in, make it stop. Once we've pushed it in and this light is flashing, we need to let it go to solid green again before it'll start. So for this guy, we want to make sure the dust covers down. We have these little feather boards to help hold the board so it doesn't come back at us. One thing that's a little different about the table saw is it has its own sort of ruler attached to it. So we use this indicator here. Let's say we wanted to set something at about 4 inches. Just set it there. And then making sure we have all the appropriate safety gear on, glasses and hearing protection. We're ready to go. Have our glasses and covers. We have this standing by. This is a push stick to help us push through here so we don't have to have our hand in between the blade and the fence. And then we just turn this on. Make sure we keep the object against the fence. Turn it off. And a nice, good, straight cut. The table saw is only limited by how big the fence is. We could make as long a cut as we want on this. So we have a 16-foot board that we wanted to trim up, we could. And that's it. So that's our first two saws we're going to look at. Table saw, which is for ripping mainly. In other words, for cutting things along the grain. And then the two miter saws for cutting against the grain. The miter saws are limited either by the travel of the blade or the width of the blade itself. The table saw is just basically whatever we have room to push through it. So that's it. In class, we're going to practice with both of them. There'll be lots of opportunities throughout the semester to get a handle on them and get a chance to practice with them. This is just a chance for you to get a sense of what the two saws are for. Cross-cutting and ripping is a good way to remember it. All right, I'll see you in the shop soon. Take care.